Just start off by welcoming everyone. My name is Michael Halicki. I'm the executive director with Park Pride in Atlanta. I'm co-chair of City Park Alliance peer-to-peer group for citywide park nonprofits. And I share those duties with Beth Nordland, who's also on the program today. City Parks Alliance is committed to finding ways now and in the future to enable peer learning between and among park groups across the country. We want this to be an active conversation. So this is not just to hear from speakers, it's a chance to engage in a conversation. So I'd encourage you to participate in today's conversation. Today's peer-to-peer conversation is made possible with support from the Knight Foundation. And the topic today is youth employment in parks. I'm happy to introduce our moderator, Angelou Ezilio, CEO and founder of Greening Youth Foundation. And by way of introduction, let me just share that I know Angelou from her work with Greening Youth Foundation in Atlanta, Georgia. And though I think of her as someone that works directly in our community, she also is working on a national scale, and really pleased that we have a connection. We've worked on today's topic of hiring youth from neighborhoods on Atlanta's West Side Park through Greening Youth Foundation. So I've had direct experience. I'll also mention that Angelou is author of a book that you can find on Amazon and other places called Engage, Connect, Protect, Empowering Diverse Youth as Environmental Leaders, that I think is something that could be some required reading for everybody on this call. So with that, let me turn it over to Angelou. So glad to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you to everyone for participating in today's peer-to-peer conversation, Youth Employment in Parks. I also would like to thank the Karens, as we have two, as well as my friend Beth from Canada, actually. And this topic today is a topic that's really near and dear to my heart, youth employment in parks. And the reason why it's near and dear to my heart is two reasons. The first is that it was my very first job was as a 16-year-old in New Jersey, actually in Essex County, New Jersey. See, if we were in person, I'd be asking who in the audience is from New Jersey. But on that note, please make sure you can change your profile by clicking on those three dots and putting your name and the organization, but also where you're calling from. So the city where you're calling from, just so that we can have an idea of who's in the room. But yeah, so my first job was working in a park. It was actually called South Mountain Reservation. I don't know how many of you have heard of it, but it's an incredible park in West Orange, New Jersey. At the age of 16, I would actually get in a van with a lot of young people, folks around my age, and we would go to this park, many parks, but that one in particular, pick up paper, pick up debris, and work on trail maintenance projects. It was so incredible. And there weren't any cell phones. So you can imagine all the talking that we did with one another, go figure. But it was really a bonding experience. But I think it had something to do with the work that I'm doing right now, which leads me to my second point of why this is so dear to my heart. Because I really do believe that this type of work, park employment, this is a great way to engage diverse young people, and not just to create stewards, but also to introduce them to these conservation careers. And that's exactly what we're doing at Greening Youth Foundation. Our mission is engaging underrepresented youth and young adults while connecting them to the outdoors and careers in conservation. So very much in line with what we're going to be talking about today. So before we get started, I wanted to make sure everyone knows how to participate in this discussion, because we don't want this just to be a conversation that Beth and I are having. We really want this to be interactive, and we want you guys to, even though it's a big group, I hear we're going to be getting close to maybe 60 people, but we want to really hear from you. So we want you to put your questions and things, and we got some questions in advance, but we also want you to put, your organization, maybe some of the programs that you're working on, put those things in the chat so that we can really engage you. Some tech reminders. You will need to unmute your audio in order to talk. Believe it or not, a lot of people forget to do that. The microphone icon is on the bottom of the screen farthest to the left. Click it to mute and unmute yourself. And when you aren't speaking, please mute yourself in order to minimize background noise. Also, please consider turning your webcam on during the discussion, as it will be a much richer conversation if we can see each other. The camera icon is located next to the microphone, which you can click to turn your camera on and off. So given our large group, please plan to join the conversation by raising your hand, by clicking the hand icon. I think most of us are familiar with these symbols by now. Typing your question into the chat box. We'll monitor the chat and incorporate those comments into the discussion as appropriate. If you're having any technical difficulties at any point, send us a message through the chat function and we'll help you resolve it. I think we got Kyle online that's going to be our online tech guy. So he'll be ready with any question or problems you might have. Also, as a reminder that today's call will be recorded, because I do know that some folks weren't able to actually join us today because we had reached capacity. So due to the very large size of our group today, we won't have time to let everyone introduce themselves. I understand that that's what you guys typically do, but instead, when you ask a question either verbally or in the chat, please say your name, as I said, your organization and the city where you're located. So next, I would love to introduce my buddy, Beth Nordland. Beth Nordland is the executive director of Anchorage Park Foundation. That's the name. I was trying to think of Anchorage. For some reason, it wouldn't come to my head. And the co-chair of CPA's peer-to-peer citywide park nonprofit cohort. Beth has served as executive director since Anchorage Park Foundation's inception in 2004. Many of her greatest joys come from convening community leaders and neighbors, working together to make something magical out of an idea. Beth uses the trails daily and can't wait for the 2021 YEP teens to grasp the Anchorage trails, connect us to each other and to ourselves. Welcome, Beth. Thanks for joining us today to talk about youth employment in the parks.
Thank you. So, yes, I am one of you. I have started, I'm the founding executive director of the Anchorage Park Foundation, and we did get that going at late 2004. The next year, my mayor came to me and said, I've been to Chicago. Why can't we in Anchorage, Alaska, have groups of teenagers in colorful shirts working on the parks, you know, picking up trash and doing that kind of work. And I put forward a proposal and it didn't get in the budget, even though my mayor asked me to do it. So the next year, I worked very diligently with a community outreach group that was working very hard to engage a diversity of youth. And we put together a program that ended up getting funded, getting private funding, and now it's a beloved part of our municipal government. And let me just tell you how that worked a little bit so you can think about how you might want to employ that in your own town or support your program that exists there already. We started the program in order to create stewards. We knew that we wanted our teens to get paid. It's 10 weeks of work in our municipal park system. So many of you are urban park systems right now on the phone. We serve teenagers 16 to 19, so they're in high school. We wanted the work to be meaningful. We've all seen teens working on things that they weren't enjoying. We wanted to create meaning for the work. And later for us, that meant hiring a field educator to create meaning for the work and connect people to it. We involve education, recreation, and volunteering in our program. And again, we ended up getting private dollars that could match the public support. But we started inside our municipality. So any of you could do this. Then a couple of years later, the Anchorage Park Foundation became a standalone nonprofit. So we are now outside of our city structure. We did not take youth employment in parks with us when we left because we consider it a city responsibility. And also the city is self-insured and they pay all of the salaries. So we wanted to leave all the those kind of issues with the city. But the Anchorage Park Foundation continues to support the program by applying for grants. We hire our contractors every year. And we also hired originally the Youth Employment and Parks Coordinator. Now, a couple of years later, we changed that position so that the coordinator works for the city, but we hire the field educator. And the field educator is a position that is only a summer education, meaningful work connector during the summer. But then for the rest of the year, that is our youth engagement coordinator. And we have a whole different program called Schools on Trails, which you might want to learn all about online. So again, our nonprofit supports the city structure by hiring the field educator, applying for grants, helping recruit, helping with mentorship week, hiring an intern, getting out a newsletter, creating media attention, hosting recreation days, working with education, certainly with civics. We do a lot of involvement with our local government, our assembly, and we hire the contractors. And these days, I am involved with the CORE Network. And the CORE Network is a national organization that helps different cores around the nation mobilize. And we are excited to be looking forward to conservation cores, or the Biden administration is calling it a climate core. We are accredited, our core is accredited, and we look forward to being to receiving dollars that could involve us in planting trees, working on riparian areas, working on our trails, and you know, there's a lot of work that can be done with unskilled teenagers on our public lands as part of the climate core. So
that's fantastic, Beth. That's great. And you know what I realized, Beth? We have a couple of things in common. So we both have a very close relationship with the city that we work with. And as you heard Michael say at the onset, we worked on projects together through the city of Atlanta. One is on a park that I know is near and dear to his heart as well, which is Lindsay Street Park. And that park, it was interesting because you talked about, and we're going to get a little bit into funding for these types of youth programs, but you talked about bringing private dollars to match public dollars. That's certainly something that Michael and I were very much involved with, because on this particular project, there were so many private corporations, but different funders. So U-Haul was even a corporation that came in and brought funding. The Conservation Fund, the City of Atlanta was involved as well. So I'd like us to talk a little bit about that a little later. But the other thing that you mentioned that we have in common is the CORE Network. So you're an accredited youth corps as well. So I think we both are. Are you the first one? Wow, the first to be accredited. Interesting, very cool. So yes, I think you guys are also, just like we are, very excited to hear about Biden-Harris's climate conservation core, climate core, and how the existing 21 CSC cores can play a role in that as they begin to roll it out. I know that they're now looking for 90-day plans and so forth. So what I would love to do right now, I know you and I can go on and on all afternoon, but I would love to open this up to our audience and find out if they have any questions, specific questions for us, but even if they'd like to share some information about their programs. So let's go ahead and open it up to those in the audience. And as I said, you can raise your hand by clicking the hand icon, or you can either put your question in the chat box. Karen, I don't know if there are any questions that
Angelou, I was just about to say, we had a good one come in from Mary Lynn. She wanted to know how many youth do you employ each season? So both of you, these are questions for both of you. And what's the role of contractors? And then how many years can youth be in the program?
Great. Go ahead, Beth.
Our program serves as a first-time job for teens ages 16 to 19. And then there's 21 kids at that level, the crew members. And then there's an opportunity for 4 of those crew members to return the next season as a senior crew member. And then we have an intern that the Anchorage Park Foundation hires separately. I have an organizational chart in our annual report, which I think Karen is going to, it's part of the resources for this program. So a lot of your detailed questions can be answered that way. But yeah, that's our org chart.
Awesome. And then with us, our Urban Youth Corps program, we have about crews. And it's about 5 people per crew. So, we're a little on the smaller side, probably 15 to 20 a year. However, and since, we just started in 2014 with our Urban Youth Corps program, but there's so much opportunity. We're now starting to really scale up, and Michael and I are talking about doing more work together with the city, and, we're working with Georgia Power. So the numbers are really increasing now as people hear about what we're doing. But our main program has been with our Youth Conservation Corps. So we work directly with college students and provide internship opportunities for young adults to work on federal lands. So through that program, working with the National Park Service and the USDA Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, and so on, we probably place about 500 young adults on lands across the country every year. So between those 2 programs, and then we have our environmental education program. So we really believe in that continuum of starting when they're very young with the environmental education, moving to our Youth Conservation Corps, and then we have our Urban Youth Corps program where young people aren't necessarily going the college route. But Beth, I would love to talk to you more about, and Michael, perhaps this is something that we could explore, is a teen corps, because we really start at 18 and we go to 25 for our Urban Youth Corps, but there's so many young people between the ages of 14 and 15 to like 17 that need jobs, that first time job that I had. And I think that your YEP program is more addressing. So we got to, Mike, I think I found our sweet spot. So that's what we can talk about. Are there any other questions or comments? I see a couple more. Karen, did you want to share or have them share?
Yeah, I'll just jump in. Kyle Wolf submitted one. Can anyone share how they're getting funding for the program? So maybe in addition to you guys talking about that, maybe we could open it up to who else is, how other people are funding their programs.
Great.
So my program has municipal funding that we have committed for the teen salaries. And as you will imagine, the teen salaries for a 10-week program, which is summer construction in Alaska, they don't really add up. That's not the major expense of the program. It's scoping the work, having your landscape architects and having your contractors and your materials. So we have grants every year from the Fish and Wildlife Service, from the BLM, from the Forest Service, state and private forestry money. There's a lot of money that you can access even though your projects are on urban municipal lands. And so that's where we've honed in, which is different, Angelou, than many of the other programs involved with the core network, because they will go out to federal lands and do work. But for us, we do the bulk of our work on municipal lands. So we have to seek funding that is applicable to municipal lands, or you might call it whole landscapes. So some of our parks are adjacent to federal lands, but a lot of it has to do with, riparian areas, salmon habitat, things that cross whole landscapes.
Sure, yeah, and I would say that what we've become really good at is cobbling funds, which I'm sure you can relate to. So, in addition to grants, and we have a lot of federal dollars, as you correctly stated, because we're putting these young people to work on federal lands, we're able to receive, we have cooperative agreements and master participating agreements with a lot of these federal land management agencies. So, we basically are fee for service. So, we provide them with the budget, and through that, we are able to cover our operational and staff and what am I saying? Their salaries, and all of that comes through those different agreements and budgets. But I think it's really important to be creative when it comes to funding for these projects, because that's always the first thing that everyone says is that I would love to do one of these programs, but how on earth are we going to fund it? But what's been interesting, and I'm thinking again of the one that we did here in Atlanta with Lindsay Street Park and Vine City Park, we went to different entities that may not even have been aware that they have common goals. So I'm thinking United Way and different organizations and foundations, the Turner Foundation. So be really creative with different entities that you're looking for. Who would ever think that U-Haul would be a corporation? They're not even based in Atlanta, but they were interested in supporting, the building of a park in the city of Atlanta. So really get outside of what you would traditionally think of for funding these types of summer programs or just youth programs in general. Oh, and then another quick thing that I would like to add is that I don't know how many are familiar with LA Conservation Corps, but they're so strong, and they're really kind of like our model. But one of the things that they do so that they can keep their dollars appropriated for their core, and it comes through the city, and they have a tax. So I think it may even be a SPLOS or something like that to support their work. So politically, there's a lot of work that they're doing and that their board is doing to make this happen so that there are designated dollars for these programs.
Angela, we had Sue Gardner with the Parks Conservancy in San Francisco mentioned that they have a newer program that they've been getting funding for through grants and individual donations. So maybe Sue, you could unmute yourself and share how you guys are.
Oh, would love to hear that, Sue.
The program's about 15. First of all, hi, everybody. Thank you for this conversation about a topic that's very near and dear to my heart. The program's been around for about 15 years, and we've cobbled together, it turns out, because it operates at the intersection point of youth and youth development, youth leadership, connecting youth with public lands, focusing on underserved audiences. And at that sweet intersection point, that's where we found a lot of the foundations are interested in, because we're connecting the environment with the youth. And so we look for, if we look for foundations who have those threads, and then, and often it's, smaller grants, $15,000 to $50,000 grants, I would say, that we put together. And then, because we provide the youth stipends, this year, anywhere between $500 and $1,000 for their participation. Those stipends are super easy to fundraise for with individuals. Well, we're in the Bay Area, so we can tap into quite a few individuals. But when you're looking for individuals who say, hey, I want to help this program, what's the easiest way? You can literally say, if you provide $500 or $1,000, it'll go straight to paying the stipend for the youth for their participation in a summer. So people feel like they're making a direct impact, and that has been very successful for us. And then sometimes we do have to cover the overhead if we don't get enough grants. And I think that's the challenge for an organization is you aim for grants, but then you have to have a little padding on the side. In case you don't get all the grant money you need, the organization has to be able to carry it a little bit from year to year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Sue. And then I know also another challenge is money for training the young people is sometimes an issue. So, all of these things. Thank you so much for that, Sue. That was really, really helpful. And perhaps another question, someone asked, what infrastructure do you need to put in place to just get these programs started? Beth, I don't know if you kind of talked a little bit about how you started with the city and then you moved away. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think a lot of times city parks departments have landscape architects and different resources to do small projects. We also at our city have a natural resource coordinator. So they have content expertise, and they can sometimes help us provide the projects in order to write the grants. So yeah, we work really closely with the city, but it requires that close relationship for sure. And again, scoping the projects, doing enough public involvement in advance of the projects, setting them up so that they are something that's doable within a 10-week period of time in the summer. You know, sometimes your scoping gets off, and you always want to have a project in your back pocket in case something falls through, funding falls through, or we're not doing that, or there's the creek flooded, we can't do that project this year. So you always want to have more projects than you need.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you need to have more projects than you need, and you also have to be very flexible and be able to pivot. I know with our environmental education program that we normally do with camps and young people, you know, because of COVID, we had to pivot and make it all digital, you know, and we changed it to the green box, in which we, prepared this box of supplies for them to, whether it's seedlings or different environmental activities, so that these young people can do. But it was really important to be able to pivot. I think that that's the name of the game with youth employment, is really to be able to identify partners that have common goals, but also to be able to be nimble, and have a team of people that are working with you and that understand your goal. So thank you for that, Beth. I do appreciate that. Karen, I didn't know if there was another question, or did you want me to
We've got a ton of questions coming in the chat box right now, so I can keep throwing these in, or you can pull it up also. But another one on that same line was around strategies for making tasks, to bring meaning to tasks. There's obviously going to be some things like raking leaves, trash, or whatever. How do you really make it meaningful and rise it up to a higher level? So
go ahead, Beth. That's a great one.
We work really hard on that. We found that in the first year or two, that the crew leaders, have enough work on their plate to just herd the cats involved with having employed teenagers. And so we have a specific field educator who does the science work to especially things like pulling invasive species. There's all kinds of federal money for pulling invasive species, but if you can't tell us why that matters to the ecosystem, to the salmon, to our way of life here in Anchorage, it's really boring work. And we knew from the beginning that we weren't going to have bored teenagers not finding meaning, because it goes against the whole reason of doing this, right? We're trying to create stewards. We're creating people who are always going to vote for park bonds. And if we're boring them, that's not part of what we're doing here.
And it quite frankly, it doesn't really work, right? If it's boring to them, that was in large part why we started our work, is to make all of this resonate with the young people. But, I totally agree with you. And especially summers here in Atlanta, it's so hot, so hot. So to try to encourage teenagers to work outdoors in the summer is more than a notion. It's really, really tough work. So what we found is two things. As opposed to just having them work on different projects that we decided they work on, because that didn't necessarily work, because a young person that might have an interest in stream banks or trails, and if we put them on other issues or working on different things, it may not resonate. They might want to work with young people, so they may be more interested in our environmental education programs with the little ones. So the first thing is finding out from them what they're interested in, actually talking to these teens and sitting them down, and then maybe give them some training, more, as you said, kind of field training, some more general type training, and then find out what they're really interested in. And then you would not believe, when you pair that interest with the job or with the activity, then the light bulb goes off. And then it becomes something that really means something to them, as opposed to this like rote work that they're doing in this really hot heat. And then the other thing that we've noticed is that it's all about relationships. It's about them building bonds with one another. So, creating cohorts so that they're now bonding and building these relationships. And I still have one of the young ladies that I work with, and I'm not even kidding you, I'm still friends with to this day. We actually went to middle school and high school together, but we started working on that job together. So building cohorts so that they can get to know each other. So then it doesn't necessarily just become about that job. It becomes about, I'm wanting to go to see my friends. I'm wanting to hang out with my friends. So those are two things that I found really help in making this work meaningful. But when you do find it, then one last thing on this, and I know we have a lot of other questions, but it's important too, when you're interviewing for these different opportunities, find the young ones that are interested in the outdoors or conservation or sustainability or natural research, and they know at that young age, because this becomes that gateway. So the interviewing process and the screening is really important as well.
So we had a number of people jump in with a little information about the programs that they're running. Maybe people could speak up. I'm just going to list a couple here. We've got Robert with Grand Rapids, and we had Kevin in Philadelphia, and Sue with the Parks Conservancy has her hands up. So why don't we go to Robert in Grand Rapids? You want to tell us a little bit about your program?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Go ahead.
Hey, Robert.
Hi everybody. So yeah, kind of like I said in chat, I work for a nonprofit called Friends of Grand Rapids Parks. I'm a current urban forest coordinator. And yeah, so, we plant, anywhere from 800 to 1,000 trees a year in the city of Grand Rapids. And so we're a small team. We have 8 people on our payroll. And so, maintaining those trees is really the biggest part of what our job is. And so, we were throwing around some ideas last year. And so one of the things that we thought of was we actually took the idea from Greening of Detroit. They have a urban youth court. And so we decided to, pilot our own program. We hired 4 youth last year, summer of 2020, who worked with us for 12 weeks. We did anything, we maintained trees, we watered, we pruned our newly planted trees. And then we also looked to, expand their exposure to the environmental field. So we held different workshops that, some of our partners came and taught them about urban agriculture, about urban foraging. We had a budgeting workshop. And so, really, I think the biggest takeaway that I got from that we all got from that is that, you really have these youth who are, really interested in the environmental field. And in our case, we were working with youth of color, and, the environmental field is largely one demographic. And so to expose these youth to these different opportunities, I think was really amazing. And so we'll be looking to, continue, we're continuing planting trees. And so we'll continue hiring youth. I think we're looking to hire 10 youth this summer to help us, do the same thing as last year. And so, it's great. I'm excited to kind of listen to everybody and what everybody has to say, get all these great ideas and kind of bring them back to Grand Rapids. So
that's fantastic. Sounds like you're planting seeds and trees, because who knows, a lot of them are going to be environmentalists and stewards for sure in the future. So keep up the great work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for doing this today.
Sue Gardner had her hand up. I wanted to call on her.
Thanks. I just wanted to add in to some time back, somebody asked the question of, what's the most important pieces to invest in terms of infrastructure? And there was so many good responses. And I just wanted to add one, which is in looking back at where we've invested, one of the most I think, important places was we invested in a really good youth program leader. That is where we did cut because it makes a huge difference. If you have a person who's running youth that's not just a natural resource person, that actually has an experience in youth development and youth education, that ideally represents the communities that you want to serve, that has made all the difference in the world. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. The second one is one thing we're challenging ourselves with is that, we can only offer so many programs. I think there's, in general, I think for all of us in the public lands and environmental world, we tend to think of what we can do within our own organization. And we can do a lot and we can get a lot of lift. But the challenge that we're looking at now is like, we can do so much more if we stop thinking about ourselves as just ourselves, as one organization, as one person, and we think of ourselves more as an interconnected network amongst all the other partners around us. And if we really start opening that funnel and looking more regionally and then partnering, then we don't have to do everything. We just have to be connected to others. And that creates the pathway, right? Then somebody else can handle middle school. And then they can reference us. Somebody's over here is doing elementary school. And then, so we're trying to create an infrastructure and let go of all of our egos and come in together and say, for the good of the students, what can we do as a collective?
Dude, that is so powerful. And I mean, because it's all about that ecosystem, but collaborative effort. Thank you so much for that point. Really, really powerful. Beth, did you want to add to that?
My recommendation is hiring a person year round for some of the work ends up really creating, reducing your turnover. And turnover is where you have a lot of inefficiency and you don't build the relationships. So that is one of the questions asked in the chat is, how can we do this field educator? Well, we have year-round duties for that person that is involved with youth engagement in another way. But I would recommend, this is a time in these young people's lives where there's a lot of transiency. They're willing to move around the country to do some of this trail work. But if you can't keep a consistent job, then you'll lose some of the quality and you'll lose some of the relationships.
Anjali, we have a number of questions in the chat that are related to each other, so I'm going to throw them out all together, and maybe we could see if other people have thoughts and reactions. It's around recruitment, making sure to recruit from low-income communities and minority, how we can be effective in engaging diverse communities in this, and then also how do you go through a process of applications, interviews, decision making? How do you select the students to get a good cohort in? And then you talked a little bit already about retention.
Yes, I'm glad someone brought up the point about inclusivity, because I think, and I know that was there were some questions that we got where we sent them out in advance, and Robert spoke on it a little bit, and I think Beth as well. But we talk about this being a very critical point in a young person's life. So it's so important to create an environment in which they feel like they belong. Like, this is so important, for the future of this young person. It's really a determinant as to whether they're going to even think that this is a field that they can consider for the future for themselves. So our work is really important at this stage to make sure they understand that there is a place for them in this field. So how do we do that? And I think that, and as Robert said, in 2021, unfortunately, it's still a very homogeneous field. And there's still so much work that we need to do to make it more inclusive, to engage more Black and Brown young people, people from different walks of life, socioeconomic groups, understanding that it can't just be volunteerism. That if we want to make sure that we get diverse groups of people, then we have to understand the history and the fact that it's not a level playing field. So because it's not a level playing field, and we know that we want to get some of these people who aren't typically at the table, then we have to make sure we're paying them. So these are the things that we have. So we have to approach it from an intersectional lens. And one of the things that Beth said that was important that I think is critical in terms of having these young people feel comfortable is having diverse staff, having people on your staff that represent the young people you're trying to reach. It's very, very important, but I think it escapes a lot of people. So some of the questions are, regarding the interview selection process, how to dismantle white supremacy culture. I could talk for probably 5 hours on this topic, so I'm gonna let Beth, if you wanted to kind of chime in on that, and if anybody else, I want to kind of put these questions out there so that we can just get a conversation going, because it's a very heavy topic.
We focus a lot on recruitment, and we started out recruiting in different we work with partners who help us recruit in atypical ways.
Partner.
And then now we work with the schools, and we've got a great reputation and a lot of word of mouth. I still am concerned that we will start migrating back to just affluent communities if we're not careful.
Yes.
And so we work on recruitment, and also it's a first job, and so we don't have to base it on your grades or a teacher recommendation. We do interviews, and one of the benefits of interviewing for the program, every applicant gets an interview. And so that's another service we're providing the community, is interview skills.
Well, that's great. That's great. And can I open it up to the attendees to kind of hear some of their strategies and approaches to diversifying the youth employment that they have within their programs? I would love to hear some ideas.
And feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in.
Because I think, this is a peer-to-peer conversation, and it's important. You could always hear from somebody who's in this space all the time, but I think it's really important to hear and to share stories with each other of your successes. So anybody, Robert, and I hate to call on you, but you kind of opened this door for us. What kind of things that have you guys done in Grand Rapids to kind of attract diverse young people? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. So kind of like what, going off what I said about how the environmental field is, not diverse. The work that we do is really, we're only able to do the work that we do because of volunteers. And so all of our volunteers are also are not very diverse. So we talk a lot at Friends about how can we increase our pipeline of, talent of volunteers. And I think that starts with just like, when we're planting trees, like we try to go into neighborhoods and we try to work with the neighborhoods. Like we don't work at the neighborhoods. Like we're not going in trying planting trees to plant trees, and then leaving. Like we're trying to go in there, establish relationships with community partners, get them on board, and then we plant trees with them. And so I think it's kind of the same thing that we do with like, attracting, young, diverse, kids of color. Is just, we go into an area with an idea that we're not going in there to accomplish all of our goals. We're going in there to try and build relationships, to try and, walk alongside people.
Absolutely.
And I think that kind of includes going in there and, being a part of what they're doing as well, like going to their events, sitting at their table as well.
Yes.
And then, yeah, like you said, like we pay our kids per hour. They work with us 15 hours a week. They get paid per hour. They get a check every 2 weeks. So it's a real job for them. And I think it's just, we want to invest in this youth, and we want to show them that we're investing in them. And I think, through our actions, I think that, we really try and do a good job at that. And so
that's fantastic, Robert.
Yeah.
What I want to ask is, and I'll open this up for anyone, how do you all deal with the transportation barrier? That's something that comes up quite often. And I know within our organization, that turns out to be a big expense for us. Because if you're not in a city where public transportation is, very smooth and is something that's reliable, then that's something that you have to take on as an organization, as a municipality, to make sure these young people are getting to their jobs on time, which isn't always something that funders want to pay for. So talk to me about, that barrier and perhaps any other barriers you've encountered as a result of working with diverse youth.
Thomas from Newark had a good idea on transportation. You want to speak up, Thomas?
Uber.
Sure, I have a somewhat weak internet connection.
Branchbrook Park. I love Branchbrook Park.
Yes, so Branchbrook Park is in the city of Newark, New Jersey. We're a 360-acre park, and I work with Branchbrook Park Alliance. We've been operating a summer youth employment program for the last 4 years. We're going on our 5th year, and we typically engage 20 city of Newark youth between the ages of 14 to 24. To answer the question about the issues around transportation, one of the things that we've done in previous years is reached out to Uber and asked for their generous donation of online gift cards that the kids could use to support with their transportation needs. So it was just one idea that we could share. And while I have the floor, so our program is in partnership with the City of Newark. So the City of Newark provides the funding and the stipends for the about 400 young people to participate in the Summer Youth Employment Program. And then they seek nonprofit organizations who are interested in receiving cohorts. We do have the option to facilitate and participate in the selection process, but we choose not to. So instead, we are assigned with 25 young people because that presents us typically with a mixture of age ranges. And so our program participants usually run between the ages of 16 and 19. But that also presents us with a greater challenge in that we are typically receiving program participants who may not necessarily have wanted this as their summer youth employment opportunity. So we may end up with the young person who's typically the one tagging the historical structures. And now that this is their summer youth employment opportunity and we have the chance to make them become stewards and passionate about this historical landscape in their backyard. So we too partner with other organizations within the surrounding community. We know that we're not subject matter experts in everything. And so 4 days out of the week, the young people are working with our horticulturalists to learn more about the science of soil management and plants. And then they're also working with our director of landscape management to learn more about the engineering side related to regrading slopes and irrigation systems. But then we reach out to our corporate partners in the community because 1 day a week we partner with the local public library who donates space and technology. And then we invite, as an example, employees of Wells Fargo Bank to come in and donate their employees' time to facilitate financial literacy workshops because clearly this is the first time that the young people are receiving these financial resources and they need to understand, why is it important to save and have a plan for your funding. And then we reach out to other financial institutions like Prudential to facilitate other soft skills related to job readiness. And so interviewing skills, resume building. So we'll invite their employees to come into the local library across the street to facilitate that component. And then we'll reach out to health and wellness individuals or organizations that will come in and work with our young people on meditation and mindfulness.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
They can channel their anger and frustration in different ways so it doesn't come out in violence and
that is fantastic, Thomas. Thank you so much for sharing. And please put all of that information, as much as you can, the name of that in the chat. Those are great resources, particularly for working with diverse young people. And I love the meditation and yoga and that stillness piece, which is so critical. But you've also opened the door for the next kind of round of discussion that I would love to get into, which is career pathways. So you talked about, the botany and horticulturalist and engineering and all of that. So I would like, I'd like to open it up to others on the call to just hear about, and I'm certainly a poster child. I started, working at, South Mountain Reservation, don't you, Thomas? Yes, that's where I started, and now I'm doing the work that I do. So I would like to others to kind of talk about how we can use these youth employment opportunities as a career pathway. How it kind of leads to, and I don't know, some of us have been around long enough to see, that cycle has happened in which they've come in working for a youth corps or through a youth employment type program, and then they have gone on to work in this field. Does anyone have an example like that they could share? Or career pathways within their programs? Thomas has just shared some of them. So you're already thinking along those lines of introducing them to some of these careers that exist within the field now that you have them and you know that they're interested, right?
Looks
So
like Dan Hendy had his hand up.
Okay.
Yeah, I could share real brief. 1976, I was part of the Youth Conservation Corps in Stoke State Forest, New Jersey. And
Jersey people.
yeah, I'm from Bloomfield, so there you go.
Oh my gosh, live in Montclair.
All right, yeah, okay. So anyway, I'm a living example. I went to this program. We did a lot of work. It was an overnight program for 40 days, I think, or 6 weeks, something like that. And we did everything from constructing outhouses to repairing trails to re-roofing picnic shelters. But it was interspersed with these 15-minute capsules of environmental education and to explain why we were doing forestry work and why we were, building the shelters or repairing. And also the weekends were dedicated to outings with our group.
Wow.
So we would bike or we would do a canoe trip or something like that. And it was just the most wonderful experience, turned me around when I was like a junior in high school. And I ended up being a recreation professional.
Oh my gosh. So what was your major in college? Was it tied back to that?
It was Parks and Recreation, and it was Wildlands Administration and Parks and Recreation. So yeah, it works. And a lot of those techniques that you're talking about as far as getting the students engaged on another level besides the work is what I think is key for these programs. So I'll stop there, but
thank you so much.
There's your example.
Thank you so much, Dan. Beth, did you want to join in on the career pathway?
Well, for this group of possibly nonprofit leaders, I think one thing we're good at is engaging volunteers. And so getting community involvement in the program is something that really deepens your community commitment. So if you can bring your hydrologist out there or even your banker, whoever you've got in the community that cares about your program that can bring expertise out into the field and maybe be coordinated by your field educator, they can end up being someone that really cares about your program in the future, helps with recruitment and
dollars.
And dollars, yeah, including federal dollars, because those are federal employees live in our communities.
Yes. And it's always, one other quick thing is when we back to cobbling funding, like if you can bring in federal dollars sometimes to the programs, because sometimes it's just public lands that is, the criteria, do that for sure. But great stuff. I didn't know, Karen, if there was probably have time for one more question.
Well, there was one other person who had commented in about job shadowing and staff mentors, and that was BK Kohler. I don't know if you want to jump in on this topic at all.
Sure. Hi. I was just mentioning, I worked in events and operations and find myself back in Parks and Recreation now. But one of the things, we ran our facility primarily on student staff. So after 6 o'clock in the evening, all the way up until midnight, closing the building, students were the only ones running the facility. And they were also the ones running our facilities on the weekends.
Mm.
And so putting that responsibility into the hands of young developing students and, you know, young professionals in that kind of sense, it was really eye-opening for them, but it was also one of those kind of transition moments for us as full-time staff, but also realizing that you're putting the hands and the safety of facilities into their hands. And so that responsibility and supporting them with that training really was what kept the students coming back. And then we also made sure that, you know, the way we would diversify our staff is we would put the hiring back into the students' hands as well. So that way they would go out, they would do the recruitment, and they would
Nice.
actually do the decision making. And so it was kind of
Wow, I
that
like
responsibility process is what really created buy-in. And that's why we would have 4-year students that would stay their entire time from freshman all the way up through graduation and some beyond.
I love that. And you were creating leaders too by giving them that authority, so to speak. And what I love that what you brought up was the importance of showing variety within the field. You know, people often think that there's just one thing that you do when you think of working in outdoor rec or working in parks or working as a ranger, whatever. So giving them that view of how expansive it can be is also important, because then they're like, oh, well, I tried to do a little piece of this when I was in high school and I liked it. So that will always stay with them. So thank you for sharing that. Karen, I didn't know if we had time, or do you want me to start wrapping up?
I think unfortunately we'll probably have to start wrapping up, but there's so many great comments on here and so many people ready to engage. I just wanted to let everybody know that we will be sending off a list to all of you of everybody who's registered for this, so that you can connect with each other, because this is all about peer connections. If for some reason you don't want your name on that list, let us know. Otherwise, we'll make sure you all can connect directly with each other.
Fantastic. So before we close, I want to just let you know about 2 upcoming City Park Alliance webinars. One is Designing Parks to Meet Climate Resilience Challenges, and that one is March of 2021, so next month. And then the other is Parks as Catalysts for Inclusive Economic Development. Oh, that one sounds really good too. And that was April 2021. Make sure to mark your calendar for City Park Alliance's summer series, and that's from June 14th to the 25th. The themes of the series are racial equity, recovery, and resilience. Following this call, Karen will be sending everyone who, she just said that, a recording, as well as links to additional resources on this topic in our Parks Exchange resource library. We would like to thank the Knight Foundation again for their support of CPA's peer-to-peer programming. Thank you again for your participation today. We hope to see you at future City Park Alliance events. Thank you everyone for joining us. This was fantastic.
Thank you to Angelou and Beth, and to Michael, Angelou in particular, for moderating. Thanks so much for all your help with this. It's been a great conversation.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, everyone.